And our lives became, I was extremely scheduled anyways, but it became even more intensely scheduled because I did the day shift 7 to 3. And then when the other 3 came home from school, it was like Stephen from 3 to 7, and then the older kids from 7 to 10, you know.
That impressed me because it was not just that it was being done, but it was being done with enthusiasm and zeal and care and generosity.
As a devout Roman Catholic, Linda has always believed that significant grace and strength are derived from Holy Mass and from receiving the body and blood of Christ in communion. Thus, it was her desire that Audrey receive Holy Communion daily. Because of Audrey's confinement to bed, Bishop Bernard Flanagan of the Worcester Diocese granted permission for a tabernacle to reserve the communion host in Audrey's room. Although now at home, Audrey still received constant visitors. Her bedroom resembles a shrine filled with different statues of saints and holy pictures received as gifts. After first being released from the hospital, time passed quietly for Audrey, her birthday and holiday celebrations taking place from her bed. However, that all ended in 1989 as some remarkable changes began to occur. Visitors began to report a strong aroma of roses in Audrey's presence. Many experienced physical healings or dramatic spiritual awakenings. Audrey's family and friends were puzzled by an increasing number of unexplainable occurrences. Periodically, during shift changes, nurses would return to find the religious statues facing the tabernacle where the Eucharist was reserved inside. When the other nurses or family members were questioned if they had turned the images, the answer was always no. As Audrey's visitors shared these mysterious experiences with others, word spread, and eventually as many as 60 people a week were coming to the Santos home.
But anyway, I kept coming for 6 months to Audrey's, and I found myself really wanting to go to the church in the morning and stop in before work for 10 or 15 minutes and just be alone with our Lord, just in front of the tabernacle. And after 6 months of coming, I saw things happening here. I saw some phenomena.
The impression was forming, even among some in the media, that Audrey was a soul chosen by God for a special purpose. Father Edward McDonough occasionally drives the hour commute from Boston to see Audrey. He believes she is a statement of life in our culture of death.
You say, what does this girl do? She doesn't do anything of significance in a worldly way. As a matter of fact, she's a burden rather than an asset because she needs so much help. But in God's plan, her life is precious and He's using it. And He's signifying the importance of her life by the miracles that are surrounding it.
Linda Santo believes that despite these dramatic reports of spiritual experiences and her constant efforts to alleviate her daughter's pain, in a manner known only to God, Audrey accepted this mission of suffering. Nonetheless, she still prays for Audrey's complete healing.
And I ask that prayer on a consistent basis every day of my life. It's not something that I do a little novena for, or once in a while, I think of it at Mass. I say it consistently, all my waking hours. Come on, God. You do all this, get her up. You know?
Sister Laura Aversano has helped the Santo family with visitors. She believes when people see Audrey suffering, it helps them to accept the pain in their own lives.
It's a variety of people. You could never categorize a certain type of person. It's people who really are looking for, I think, spiritual peace, spiritual healing, sometimes physical healing, sometimes just a sense of feeling a closeness to God. God has really blessed this suffering, and I think they are so moved by that. They are so moved by her acceptance of the suffering, and all the different manifestations around her that happen. And I think it moves people's souls. I have seen people, when they visit Audrey, walk in and then all of a sudden they'll just burst out crying. And it's as though their whole sense of themselves and their world and their relationship with God all comes together.
Increased visitors and constant requests for Mass resulted in converting the garage into a small chapel. Although more people became an added strain, friends and family credit Linda's patience in making the most of a difficult situation.
It's just all the grace of God. I mean, you just have to kind of go with it. You know, you have to roll with it. I mean, what else can you do? If God's doing something, we're just human beings, you know. God gives you what he gives you, only because you can handle it. He doesn't give you any more. And with everything he gives you grace. You know, sometimes it's a very profound grace. But the most profound grace is the fact that he gave you a child. That's so important. People don't see that.
Audrey receives many visitors, even from outside the United States. On this day, Joseph Turelia has traveled from Canada to see Audrey. Turelia is a Ukrainian Catholic who spent 23 brutal years in Soviet prisons because he refused to denounce his faith. Joseph's life has attracted the attention of the national media, and a recent book documents his struggles while in prison. In October 1987, Turelia testified before the United States Congress about the abuses he and other believers suffered in the Ukraine. Turelia feels a strong connection to Audrey. He believes she represents a providential sign for us to re-examine the value of human life and suffering.
Я нині, коли зайшов, почав молитися.
So when I entered into her room and I started praying,
Я нагнувся над нею,
I bent over her
говорю, I'm Йосиф.
and I told her I'm Joseph.
А вона розумно подивилася.
And the look that she gave me seemed to be a look of
І таке
awareness.
відчуття, що вона усміхнулася.
And I had almost an interior feeling that she was smiling at me.
Окей? І я відчув, і переді мною став такий великий символ.
And in that moment I saw her as a very special symbol.
Це дитина Божа.
This child represents God's
Це
providence.
дитина образ церкви 20-го століття.
She is a picture of the condition of the church in this end part of the 20th
Це
century.
є попередження всім католикам світу.
This is a warning to all the world.
Не мовчим на гріх і не спім.
Not to continue sleeping and remain silent when we're confronted with evil and with sin.
Любімо один одного і Господа.
We have to love one another and love our God.
Although Turelia can express the suffering he endured, Audrey cannot. She has not spoken since the accident. Her communication is limited to eye movement or an occasional squeeze of her hand. She responds to voices, to touch, and to some light, and has normal sleep patterns. Although some see Audrey as disconnected from the world, her nurses say she is very aware of her surroundings.
You just have to get to know her. You just have to see the things that happen to her and know that when you're doing something to her or when she's cold or just different things that go on in her life where, like any other child, they'll get mad or they'll be glad to see somebody. Her grandmother walks in the room and you can tell right away that she's happy and she doesn't want her to leave. Sometimes she has tears in her eyes and she's crying.
Nurses say Audrey appears to have a unique relationship with many priests.
When a priest comes in, she gets really relaxed, and sometimes when he touches her, you know, holds her hand, she'll squeeze it really hard, and her eyes will go over to him, and you can tell that she's glad that he's there, and she's happy to see him.
And they rose from the dead to life.
Father John Meade, a priest from a nearby parish, says Audrey has had a tremendous impact on his priesthood. He says her suffering reminds him of Christ's passion. He has seen similar impact on other clergy.
These priests that come here, I see all of a sudden it dawns on them I've seen some instant retreats, you might say. Every retreat you make is supposed to do that, hopefully. And I've seen it happen here within seconds. And it does change them. It makes them take a step forward, closer, closer, and closer to Christ. But wait till they find the goal, the fruit, and that's Christ himself.
There are ordinary things that actually I am touched. I'm touching and I'm touched back by that.
Priests from across the world have befriended Audrey over the years. Perhaps the similarities between her sufferings and those of Christ are what draw them here. Sometimes those similarities are striking. In past years, during the Lenten season, nurses say that Audrey mysteriously suffers extreme pain with no medical explanation. It usually occurs between the hours of 12 noon and 3 p.m., the time of Christ's passion and death on the cross on Good Friday.
It took me a while, but it just so happened that like noon would come, and then all of a sudden, you know, her condition would change. You know, she would be pretty quiet, normal, and then all of a sudden she would get really agitated, become really uncomfortable. You know, her breathing would change. You know, her respiratory rates would go really high, up into the 50s sometimes. Her heart rate would increase up to like 180, and it would last sometimes for hours. And you know, to sit there with your heart pounding so fast for so long, I couldn't even imagine what it would feel like. And she would really manifest signs of discomfort, and you know, she was agonizing. I don't know. And so she would get really rigid at times. Her body tone would change. She would get a lot of increased body tone. She'd get real rigid like a rock, and where her shoulders would go back and her chest would come forward, and her head would be all the way to the right, and she would just like be breathing, really fast and real, you know. And so she would require more oxygen. She would require more suctioning. You know, it was quite an intense time, because no matter what you did for her, it wouldn't change her condition. She'd be perspiring, you know. So, and if you try to move her, it was impossible sometimes. Sometimes I couldn't even lift her.
Nurse Joanne Erickson has helped care for Audrey since 1988. In 1989, she saw wounds on Audrey's body like those suffered by Christ. Called the stigmata, these wounds of Christ are widely viewed by church authorities as a gift from God and a physical sign of a soul's intimacy with Christ.
Now, many critics have seen it and have evaluated, and they're all saying, we thought we had seen it all. What happens when a young girl in a quasi-comatose state, with no defense, with no testimony, has been the center of attraction the world over? Mysterious cures, phenomenal miracles, and she has the phenomena of the stigmata. A young girl living in the 21st century, a mystery to all, an answer to many more. Thanks for joining us on our trip to Worcester, Massachusetts, on our program, Heaven Bless the Little Ones. I'm your host, Tom O'Connor, and thank you for allowing us into your homes one more time.